One. Alrighty, guys. Hope everyone's doing well tonight. We've got a great evening show lined up. This one's been in the works for a little while. This one is actually a story that really, and a subject matter that really helped get the channel started because one of my co-hosts, Brandon Brewer, is a very big advocate for the POW MIA issue and basically the men, the families, and what our government has done wrong over the years. And we're actually going to be speaking with a very important case, one of the family members of a very important case today. And our guest today is Mr. George Luck Patterson. He was a lieutenant with the United States Marine Corps. I'm going to let him give a little brief bio on him so I don't mess up. But he's going to go into a little bit about his background as a Marine, and his story intertwines because him and his brother were in country at the same time and actually went on a operation together before, sadly, his brother was shot down. So, Mr. Luck, thank you for joining us. And if you'd like to speak a little bit about or give a little bit on your background and what you did in the Marine Corps and when you joined and such as that.
All right, bud. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, my brother and I, Kelly Patterson, grew up in a Navy family. My dad was a career man in the Navy. He had spent some time. In fact, when I was born, he was on a battleship in the Pacific, the USS Mississippi. And I was born in 1944. He was a career man, like I say. He was. He was almost, I was almost 20, I think, when he retired from the Navy. We went all over the world, Panama, Europe, and we came back to Southern California, where I went to high school and eventually went to college. And there I was, I got into a program to get into the Marine Corps as an officer. I passed all those trials and became an officer in June of 1966. We went to about 6 months of Quantico, what they call the basic school for the Marine Corps, and then I was assigned to Vietnam as an infantry officer. I got to Vietnam in about January of 1967. My brother was already there a month, and we both knew that we were going to go. We both wanted to go. We knew that we were going to be together over there. However, my brother was on a carrier, the USS Enterprise. I'm sorry, USS Enterprise. He was with VA-35 and A-6 attack bomber squadron. So he was actually in country, off the Tonkin Gulf Yankee Station about a month before I got into country. I was assigned to a rifle platoon with the Marine Corps with the 1st Battalion of the 1st Marines. We were located about an hour's drive or two from south of Da Nang, outside of the little district capital of Hoi An. It wasn't real active where we were. We got in some firefights, but very minor, always worried about snipers and so forth. Meanwhile, my brother was flying A-6 Intruders bombing missions over North Vietnam off of the carrier. So I was there I'd say about 4 months. I was there 4 months. My brother's carrier pulled into the Philippines for a little bit of downtime. They were getting refurbished or resupplied. And my brother asked his commanding officer if he could come and see his kid brother in Da Nang. He got permission. My brother came, but he didn't find me in Da Nang. I was in the boonies. I was in the rice paddies. But he somehow found his way to me and arrived just as I was getting my rifle platoon ready for a 3-day combat patrol. Yeah, that's us. Uh, I'm the tall one. He's the good-looking one. Okay, and that's a great picture. I love that picture. Anyway, he found me there, and just as I was talking about the patrol and briefing my people about the patrol that was going to be, I believe, the next morning, very early. And he wasn't to be denied. He was not to be denied a visit. Now you got to understand, this is a naval officer who is the navigator bombardier on an A-6 Intruder, which at the time was the cutting edge of our technology. And the cutting edge, the Russians didn't have that. And he was the guy that sat next to, that is, to the right of the pilot. And he was the guy that was operating all of these instruments that was getting by the defenses around Hanoi and around whatever their target was. And he was the guy that was doing all that. He would get them around the defenses, he would put a bomb on target, and then he would get around the defenses again and fly back home, fly back to the carrier. They could fly on total instrument. He told me once that that there were several occasions, several missions where they would leave the carrier at night, and the last thing they saw outside, that's the A-6, the last thing that they saw outside of the cockpit was maybe a light on the carrier, and they would fly totally blind in monsoon weather, all kinds of rain hitting the windshield, and it was totally black outside, and he was flying by instrument only, just above the deck when they went feet dry over in Vietnam. They would drop their bomb. They would come back to the carrier, and then they would finally see another light on the carrier. That would be on the whole mission. They wouldn't see anything outside. So he was the guy that was doing all that. And the Russians wanted to know how he was doing that, and if they could get a hold of an A-6 bombardier navigator, they thought it was like manna from heaven, because they could interrogate him, torture him if need be, and he could tell them what he did and when he did it, and they could create defenses. They could alter their defenses and maybe shoot some of these planes down. Anyway, so this is the training he's got. He's got all kinds of training in him, and he is a naval officer, and he's coming to see his Marine brother in the rice paddies of South Vietnam. Well, he was not to be denied a visit. So I issued him a helmet and a flak jacket and an M16, and I took him along on my 3-day combat patrol as a participant. And he had somebody take that picture that you just showed of both of us. We didn't have much going on patrol. We never got into any action. And then they called me away, my platoon, that is. They called our platoon away. Another Marine unit had been hit in the hills, and they wanted to send a bunch of units to go support that unit. So the last time I saw my brother, I was in a C-Night helicopter. I was rising off the ground, and I saw my brother on top of an Amtrak heading back to our battalion. That's the last time I saw my brother. And about a month later, he was shot down, and I was pulled out of country.
Gosh, and that when I first spoke to you and started seeing the stories and looking online, because there's a lot of information online. I once I found that photo and the heading under it that he had went on patrol with you, I was like, that's a heck of a guy to skip R&R to go hump the boonies with his Marine platoon leader brother. That's a heck of a guy right there.
He was a heck of a man. I'll tell you, he was a great officer. He was a great son to my folks. He never got married or had kids or anything, but he was a great brother to me. Can you imagine? I'm glad you picked up on that he would take his off time very stressful making bombing runs and having every weapon on the ground shooting up at you and dodging missiles that they're coming up at you, and that's stressful as heck. And to go, I think at the time he had over 70 missions at the time that he came to see me. So, and to take, it's not exactly the best way to relieve stress, to come into the rice paddies and maybe, chance dodging bullets out there with your brother.
I mean, and when he was in Vietnam at this time, what was his rank was with the Navy?
Well, he was, when he came to see me, and I believe he was a lieutenant, that would be the Marine and Army and Air Force equivalent of a captain, 2 bars.
Wow.
So he had just made lieutenant. I'm sorry, yeah, he just made lieutenant when he came to see me.
And he was also as you said, a Naval Academy graduate.
He was.
Man, man.
Naval Academy class of 63.
That lets you know right there he's definitely no slouch in the brain department as well, because you definitely aren't getting in or graduating the Naval or West Point without putting in some book work as well.
Well, I was actually, my dad was Navy. My brother went to the Naval Academy. I wanted to go Navy too, except that I was colorblind. So I couldn't become a naval officer unless I wanted to become a supply officer. That didn't sound real interesting. And we had grown up watching, this is right after World War II, and we were growing up in the 50s, and there was a documentary series on TV called Victory at Sea. And in Victory at Sea, you would see all these Marines storming some beach like Tarawa. And when I was watching those Marines storming beaches, I was thinking these guys are gods. So I always admired the Marine Corps. And my brother, when he saw that I couldn't get a commission in the Navy, he said, "Look, you can't become an officer in the Navy." He says, "Why don't you join the best?" And so I sought out the Marine Corps, and there I was. He was the best brother you could ever have.
Gosh, it sounds like it. That's amazing, and for him to see and know that you could still be an officer, even with the technicality of not being able to with the Navy, that's amazing as well. Did speaking of that, as we're continuing on, did that colorblind affect you in the bush in Vietnam? We've spoken to some other guy, I believe one other man, and he said it seemed to actually help him out with movements and such.
It's interesting being colorblind. I can look at a photo of a tree line, especially if it's full color photo of a tree line, and to another person next to me looking at this photo, he would say, "That's a tree line." But I can say, "Well, don't you see the artillery piece there? Don't you see the tank?" And I can see those things because I'm colorblind, it's interesting. I don't know how it works. Don't ask me, how that works. But I can see things that people can't see because I'm colorblind. But I can't pass that Ishihara pseudo-isochromatic colorblind test.
That's just amazing right there. That is absolutely amazing. So continue, and Mr. Kelly always. I mean, he, as you said, I mean, he literally always wanted to fly. Like you wanted to be a Marine. He always wanted to fly, didn't he?
My brother was. If you're talking
Yes,
about Kelly, he wanted to fly. I think since he was a toddler. He was kind of an artist. Even as a very, very young kid, he painted a picture of a young kid, barefoot kid with a straw hat walking down a path, and he's got a cane pole over his shoulder, and he's carrying a bunch of fish. And I mean, it's just great little rural photograph, but up in the air, you can see an airplane. And I mean, he's wanted to fly. I think there's a song that goes, it says, all I ever wanted to do was fly, leave this world and live in the sky. And that really describes my brother.
Wow. That's beautiful. I need to look up what that song is. That's wow. That's almost brings a tear to my eye, to be honest with you. When Mr. Kelly, as you said, he preceded you in Vietnam. I should say, arriving in Vietnam. Was he immediately, as you mentioned, a very famous place for, at least for launching aircraft, Yankee Station? Was he immediately after getting to Vietnam put on an aircraft carrier, or did he come over on the Enterprise with his flight squadron?
Well, he joined the squadron back east when they were training. They were training in the A-6. They formed the squadron. They didn't form the squadron. They joined a squadron that had actually, the squadron under a different name had been at Midway during World War II. But he joined that squadron, and he and Red McDaniel, his pilot, they flew from the East Coast out to Alameda. They landed, I believe, on an airfield, and then the plane was taken over to the aircraft carrier. So he joined the. There we go. Well, Red is the tall one and good looking too, and there's my brother on his right. God, aren't they something? Anyway, they joined the carrier in Alameda, California. And then the carrier took off and went across the Pacific, and ended up. They probably made a couple of stops, probably in the Philippines, and then they went into the Tonkin Gulf to Yankee Station and started flying missions.
Boy, and I mean, especially at that time with everything going into North Vietnam, it didn't really slow down per se, but at that point in time, it was pretty wide open. I believe you said when you guys met up, he was already in his 70 or so missions
Right.
that he'd flown. And then
70 some missions.
And
so about a month. It was about a month after I saw him last, when he came in to see me in the country. About a month later, I was called out of an operation to go see the S1, the battalion adjutant. And I was told that my brother had been shot down and that he was evading, and that I was being reassigned to out of the combat zone to go to the division as a G2 watch officer. And I was there for about a week, and they gave me orders to go home and talk to my parents for about 30 days. Then they reassigned me to Japan. And they did this because there's a law, it's called the Sullivan Act, and this was because of 5 brothers in World War II that was sunk aboard of the USS Juno, I think, during the Battle of Guadalcanal. And all 5 of those brothers were lost. And so Congress said, we can't require these guys to go into a combat zone if they got a relative already there. However, you can go if you want to go. And that's what happened with my brother and I. He went, and I wanted to go, so I went too. But we had a pact, an agreement with each other, that if anything happened to the one brother, that the other brother would get out of the combat zone. And what happened is my folks knew about this agreement. So when they heard that my brother that Kelly was shot down, they were immediately on the phone to their congressman and said, get my other son out of there. And that's what happened. I mean, that was yanked out of the field while my brother was still evading capture in North Vietnam. And now brother was, he was on the ground for 3 days, evading capture. He had a broken leg. Red McDaniel was down also, but they were on the opposite sides of a ridge line, couldn't talk to each other. However, they could hear pilots talking to either one. They could hear that part of the conversation, so they knew pretty much what was going on. For instance, a pilot would say something like, confirming you've got a broken leg. And the pilot would say, great, got that. And that way, Red would know what was going on with Kelly, and Kelly would know what's going on with Red. Now, Red was captured the next day. And this is the 19th of May, by the way, when they were shot down. That would be Ho Chi Minh's birthday, interestingly enough. 19th of May, 1967. Now, my brother evaded for 3 days, and he was in radio contact almost the whole time. There was no appreciable enemy forces on the ground. It was in a very remote area, mountainous area. The only people on the ground was a bunch of rice farmers who had been given AK-47s and told, go find that guy. So they were looking for him. A bunch of farmers with AKs. There was no anti-aircraft weapons in the area. There was no missiles in the area. There was no PAVN, People's Army of Vietnam, regular soldiers. There was no regular soldiers in that area at all, anywhere near it. But General Momeyer of the 7th Air Force declined to send in a rescue effort. And a plan was made. The plan was judged to be a good plan with a high probability of success, but Momeyer turned it down. And to this day, I'm trying to figure out why Momeyer turned it down. There was just no evidence that there was anything in the area. It would have been a milk run. So basically, my brother was abandoned. I hate to say that, but it's true. And he was abandoned, and the next day he went missing.
It's after we had spoken, and we're going to get into the first big issue of things that were going to be going wrong. There were several things that just went wrong, and I after hearing the case from your side, reading documents, and as well as, guys, if you don't have this book, codename Bright Light,
There's a little bit of that, my brother's story, about 2 pages worth in there.
Yeah, page 146, 147, and 148. I'm just going to get a piece right here that one of the issues, besides what we're about to get into here, is, mind you, he said, Luck said, Mr. Kelly has a broken leg. We don't know how bad. We can only imagine it's pretty gnarly. But he survived 2 days, and he was able to get up a tree with a broke leg. But they say in this book that not only is it 2 operations in the space of 3 months would test the courage of search and rescue forces to the very extreme and prove the worthlessness of the Fulton extraction system. And that was one of the more surprising, besides General Momeyer, which I recently read about in the Cam Duck fiasco that he absolutely flubbed, that he, on the 3rd day after denying SOG men to try and reach out to SOG, the JPRC, which, as he said, would have been, Mr. Luck said, it would have been an absolute milk run to launch off Yankee Station and go straight to him, like Dick Meadows had done in 1967 or 66, if I'm not mistaken. But on the 3rd day, after all of this traffic is over past him, they decide to drop a man that's injured, been all alone for 3 days, broken leg, bleeding, a Fulton extraction system for him to rig up himself and to try and get rescued. And for those of y'all that follow the channel, y'all know what a debacle and ordeal using a Fulton extraction system would be for any man in his strength alone, much less hurt. It's usually a crew doing this, like in the movie The Green Berets, and that's just one of many things that General Momeyer really excuse my language, shat the bed and really left Mr. Kelly out to hang on that. Could
Well,
you go ahead? So,
just interrupt just a second here. And people understand what this Fulton extraction system is. It comes in a little pack. You inflate a helium balloon, and it's attached to a long, flexible rope, and it attached to a harness. What happens is the C-130 with a hook, with like a fork on its nose, especially equipped C-130 would come by. They would come under that balloon, they would grab that line, and they would literally yank the person off the ground. But it's being a flexible rope, the taking up off of the ground wouldn't injure him. But they never did this. It takes a while to set this thing up. So you couldn't be in a wooded area where you would have cover from the enemy. You had to be in an open area where the enemy would see you. And so it was. You probably have a picture of it there. I can't see it real well, but yes. But the enemy could see you. They could see you setting it up. They could see. I mean, you would be under fire. It was just foolish. The only time they used that in Vietnam, as far as I know, my brothers may have been the only attempt to lift a man out of the area when there was an enemy present. The CIA, with their teams in country, would use it to take people and equipment off the ground, but they weren't under fire. They were usually not anywhere near the enemy. So it worked just fine then. But it didn't work in a combat situation at all.
It's utter ridiculous that they even did that with his injuries and the situation he was in. Could you kind of speak about the beginning of this and what a Alpha Strike operation would be, which was the type of mission that Mr. Kelly and Red were flying that day?
Bud, you're going to have to try that again a little bit louder. I lost my hearing in Vietnam. I'm sorry.
It's fine. Could you tell us a little bit about what a Alpha Strike operation or flight was that they were flying that day?
Sure. Their target that day, when he was shot down, was a truck repair facility south of. It was actually in Hanoi, but it was south of the main part of Hanoi. And just as a side here, all those pilots flying these missions, and they had literally hundreds of conventional anti-aircraft guns firing at them. They had missiles, SAM missiles being fired up, and they're going through all of that hazard, all of that danger, and all of that horror to put a bomb on a truck repair facility. Down the block from the repair facility, they had warehouses full of SAM missiles, and they weren't allowed to touch those because they were afraid of hurting a Russian technician and bringing Russia into the war. So I mean, our leadership just had no. I'll say they had no guts. I won't say the other word. But yeah, and it was an Alpha Strike to get this thing. An Alpha Strike composed of several squadrons. There might be, I think there was only one A-6 squadron, VA-35, involving my brother, but there was a couple of F-4 Phantom squadrons that were involved, and I think there was some A-4 also bombers, but they were very slow. And the reason they got shot down is because they were flying in formation about 10,000 feet, and they were flying at the pace of the slowest squadron. With the A-4s, the A-4s that they had at the time could only go like 200, 250 knots maybe. The A-6 Intruder, like my brother was flying, normally flew at about 400 to 450 knots. And I have talked to some of the other pilots that were involved with my brother in that, and they said that they had to fly so slow to not outfly the A4s that they almost lost lift. They had to really work to keep from stalling. They were going so slow. And so you can imagine they were a great target for the North Vietnamese. Here's this bunch of planes flying in formation at 10,000 feet, so slow, and they just fired missile after missile after missile. There were several missiles fired, and the one that got my brother was like the sixth or seventh one. It didn't hit him, but it blew up near him. And my brother and they lost hydraulics. Red McDaniel, he's alive today, by the way. He's a great man, lives back east still. They lost their hydraulics, so Red had no control over this. They ejected, both of them ejected, and this is a picture of the plane going down after they've ejected, so it's fully engulfed in fire. There's a lot about that picture right there that I can tell you that's really, really interesting, but I don't want to divert that far. So I think that day, May 19th, 1967, it was a Friday. Now that's a picture there. That's probably Red where you have the pointer. Probably Red, and this down below that parachute is probably my brother. But it was May 19th, 1967. Of the three carriers that had launched strikes into North Vietnam that day, there was 2 planes lost out of each carrier. I think they lost 10 crewmen, if I'm not mistaken. So the Navy, they lost more planes that single day than they had ever had before, and Navy pilots of that area called that day Black Friday because it was so many planes had gone down.
God almighty. I mean, that making the A6s slow down like that, I mean, that is just crazy, especially hitting a truck repair facility that close to Hanoi with knowing besides Moscow, that's going to be one of the most heavily defended airspaces in the entire world at that point in time. Did as you mentioned and we saw in the photos, what occurred that we can tell right off the get-go? You kind of got into the latter part of them being on the ground. They were immediately separated, correct, by a ravine or a hill?
A ridgeline.
Ridgeline.
Yeah.
Okay. And did Mr. Red, what did he do? We know Mr. Kelly got to a tree as soon as he could. Did Mr. Red try and run for a while, or did he immediately go to ground?
Well, my brother said he was evading, but he said he had a badly broken leg. And so he at first says, I got a badly broken leg, I'm not going to be able to move. But he did move. He was able to for 3 days evade capture. On the last night, this is after they dropped the Fulton extraction kit in the morning, and that would be the 21st, and then the evening of the 21st, the rescue the F-4, the Phantoms from the Air Force out of Da Nang that were flying over him and trying to coordinate this rescue. One of them being flown by a gentleman named Jim Craig, who lives in Texas now, and I've talked to him personally. He said that during the day we located your brother by mirror flashes, and he said at night when I came back the last part of that evening to find out if he had reached and gotten hooked up with the Fulton extraction system. We found him in a tree, and when we flew over him, he would shine a flashlight up, like a laser light of some sort, up through the tree. So they knew exactly where he was. They knew the tree he was in. But he said that he was not able to get to the Fulton gear. He said that the search party had found it and almost captured him apparently. But now Red didn't know anything about this because Red was captured the next day. He was captured on the 20th, and he hadn't seen or talked directly, line of sight directly to my brother. So at that point, he had no idea what had happened to him. When all this supposed rescue effort taken place, he was already a captive.
Now, this is where it begins to get into the nitty gritty, so to speak, on the conflicting stories, shall we say, that begins popping up from the Fulton extracting rig operation and them losing track of him from the tree. Could you kind of let us know what are the different theories that have been told to you and the family of what went down at his either capture or death in combat?
Well, I'm not sure I understood or heard your entire question, but way I'll interpret it is that the reason Momeyer didn't supposedly the reason that he didn't send a rescue in was because of a concentration of enemy, troops and so forth, which was totally false. It was just total BS. There were no troops. Like I say, there was a bunch of farmers. They were actually not even mainland Vietnamese. They were Muongs. They were subsistence rice farmers that tended rice paddies that were in terraces, way up in the mountains there. There was no target nearby that we would be interested in, and therefore there was no need for POW or any kind of defensive measures or weapons to be put in that area because there was nothing to defend. It was really out in the boonies. It was really in a remote area. And Momeyer said that we can't do that because the enemy concentration is too heavily concentrated. Now, the Navy, if it had the capability, if it had the planes to do it, the Navy would have sent in their own. They made rescues along the coastline, but this was too far inland for the Navy to go. And so the Navy contacted the Air Force and said, well, we're questioning that you rescue this man. And as you saw from the book, there was a guy named Lester Hansen who was in charge of the joint personnel rescue
Center.
JCS, whatever. He was, I can't remember the last part of that, but he was in charge of that. He was the one that made the plan to get my brother out. So he makes this plan. It looks to him like there's a very good chance that there's going to be a success to get this guy out. And he brings it to Momeyer and said, "No, we can't go. I'm not gonna authorize that rescue." And as the book said, he went. Hansen actually went ballistic, and he actually had some issues. Actually, he thought he could have been court-martialed for what he said to Momeyer.
He said, and I quote, "This is the first day I've ever been ashamed to wear the Air Force uniform," and walked out.
That's what he said. And he said that he was surprised that he didn't get court-martialed. Now, he wouldn't have done that unless he thought that there was a high probability that this rescue would be a success. I mean, why would you go to your boss and get in his face if it was just maybe it would work and maybe it wouldn't work? You wouldn't do that. The fact that he was so upset about it was because you had made a plan. The plan was workable. The chances of success were great. But Momeyer turned it down. To this day, I don't understand why Momeyer turned it down.
And then that's the kind of stuff that makes your blood boil right there. And do we know Mr. Red, guys, who he's Mr. Red McDaniels has actually written a book that's out. It's kind of hard to find. It is on Amazon, and I can't remember the name. Is it Scarred? And I'll have to look it up here in a second. But he wrote a book. But his pipeline, he ended up in Hanoi, since he prospectively didn't have information on the electronics, and spent, I believe, 6 years in Hanoi.
I'm sorry, but I didn't understand that question. I apologize. My hearing is so bad.
Mr. Red, he ended up spending 6 years in Hanoi. Is that correct?
He was in the Hanoi Hilton and in a couple of other prisons for 6 years. Red is an amazing. He's really an amazing man. During his time in prison, he actually took blame for an escape attempt that he was not involved in at all. And he volunteered to take that because they were accusing him of it, but he wasn't involved. But he thought, if I just go ahead and say that I was involved, then maybe I can take some of this. Maybe I can save a man's life who would be tortured to death. So he said. So he admitted he was involved in this. He was tortured mercilessly. He survived. And after the war, he was issued the Navy Cross for his heroism of that act. He was amazing. He's just an incredible guy.
And guys, his book is called Scars and Stripes: The True Story of One Man's Courage.
Great book, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, to take the blame, considering he's already being tortured, and then to take the blame for an escape attempt that he's not a part of, that shows you the kind of man he is. A tough man, and a principled man. It's just absolutely amazing. He ends up coming home during Operation Homecoming in '73, and continues on in his career. I believe you mentioned, maybe mixing this up, did he end up becoming the captain of a ship?
He became the skipper of an aircraft carrier.
Wow. Okay.
I wish I could remember the name of it.
It may have been the Lexington.
Lexington.
Okay.
Yeah, you got it.
And to kind of continue on, well, I guess we can come back to that. I can ask a question about that. Do we know, going back to Mr. Kelly here, do we know, or is there any idea? There's conflicting reports, of course. Could you go through the reports? Was he, I believe one says he was captured, one says he may have died in a gun battle. Could you let us go into those details a little bit about what happened once he was captured?
Okay, well, for 18 years, the United States government made inquiries of the North Vietnamese, or no longer North Vietnamese government. Now it's just the Vietnam government. They made inquiries about Kelly Patterson. What happened to James Kelly Patterson? And for 18 years, there was total silence. They didn't answer anything. They didn't say yes, no. They didn't treat the issue at all. But right around 1985, my brother's ID, his military ID, and his Geneva Convention card were returned to us. And shortly after that, we started getting reports from the Vietnamese. Now, here's where it's kind of funny. The official Vietnamese written reports about the incident, I have 6 of them, and they all describe a firefight. They all describe finding this man, my brother, and my brother resisted. He fired at the people's heroic forces, blah blah, and they describe in different ways. It's interesting. They didn't plagiarize each other, these reports. They describe in different ways this firefight. There was an actual exchange of gunfire between my brother and these forces. And they found my brother, and they fired one shot. There may have been a warning shot. One report says there was a warning shot fired in the air first, and then they fired a shot that killed him. They claim, now all these reports, there's one report, one of those reports I just said, that actually while their supposed body is there and they're inventorying his equipment, they said they found a radio and it was broken, which pilots would do. They would break their radios if capture order was imminent. And they said that they found a revolver which had 2 cartridges, which had two live rounds apparently. Now that picture you showed of Red and my brother, you might show that again. My brother's wearing a bandolier, and his bandolier, you can count the rounds on it when you focus it a little closer. You can count the rounds on it. There's 12 rounds. At the end of that bandolier, under his left armpit, there is a weapon. You can't see it, but there's a revolver there, and it has 6 more rounds. So my brother went into that mission with 18 rounds. He was armed with 18 rounds. And the Vietnamese, they inventoried 2 rounds. So what happened to the other 16? Well, you would probably, like I do, you'd probably say, well, he fired those off. Well, that indicates he was in a firefight. He was firing at the enemy. Now, it's interesting that around 1991, the Vietnamese brought forward 3 or 4 guys who claimed that they were in that search party that killed my brother. They said that when they found him, they fired 1 round and it killed him. And I've asked them, did he fire his round? Did he fire in resistance? And they said no. So they describe an entirely different scenario 180 degrees out from the official reports. So the Vietnamese claim, either way, the Vietnamese claim that they when they killed him, they buried him on the spot in a very shallow grave. And that, sometime later, the pigs had taken his body and they had destroyed it and scattered the bones or whatever. And that's what their story was. Now, in the early 90s, DPMO, which became DPAA today, which is Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, but the DPMO was the predecessor of that. They sent a team. Oh boy. I've got 20% battery. I should be okay. Hang on. I hope I don't lose you here. I'm going to try to close this. Okay, good.
When you start getting low, we'll speed it up. You should be fine.
I may be able to. Let's see what happens. I'll get another warning at 10%.
Yeah.
But they claim that they buried him on the spot. Now those same people allegedly in the early 90s, they led our people to that spot, and our people dug up an area and that spot and several yards beyond that, and they found nothing. They found no remains. They found no indication that anything had ever been buried there. And then there is another alleged gravesite, which somebody else who came much later on, he said, there's another gravesite that he was buried in. He wasn't buried in this one. He was buried over here. And this month, they're actually going to go over there and try to see what they can find at that one. But not long after that, there was a Moscow weekly newspaper. It was called Kommersant. November 4th of 1991, they put an article out and they actually named my brother, and they said that my brother was taken in the late 67 to a place called Sarishagan. It's in the Soviet Socialist Republic of Kazakhstan. In Sarishagan, and he was later moved to a place called Priozersk. Now, those two places were Russian areas. They were closed military areas where they were doing research. They were doing research on missiles and maybe defenses, who knows? But that would be a logical place for my brother to have been taken and to have been questioned to see, like I say, if they could figure out ways to get around his ability in an A-6 to get by their defenses. And later on, even yet, there was a lady that, and I won't go into the detail because I'm running out of battery, it looks like here, but later on, there was a lady in Kazakhstan, in Alma-Ata, the capital, who claimed in the early 90s, anonymously in a phone call, that she had seen my brother's picture in the newspaper and his circumstances, and she said that she had met my brother when she was 13 years old, that her brother, her half-brother or step-brother, I'm not sure which, had brought this and other officer over to her house, and they brought my brother with them, like they were. And she said that she was able to communicate a little bit with my brother, that he had bought a doll to give her to commemorate the occasion or whatever, but he was under the control of these officers. And she said that I'm 100% certain the picture I saw in the paper is this man that I met when I was 13 years old. And she says, I would remember that man's face to the day I die. And they tried to get her to give her name and her contact information. And she refused. She said, you know, they're afraid of the KGB that is still a presence in there, even though the Russians had left in 1990. This is what, 1993 or so. 93 or 4. The Russians had long gone, but the KGB, or the derivative of it, the local derivative of it, was still very active, and people were very scared of it. And she was, and understandably, I tell you who I am, and you know, and how to get a hold of me, and my son, my 12-year-old son, and I are in great danger. But at the same time, she didn't ask for any favors whatsoever. She didn't ask for a visa to the United States. She didn't ask for anything in exchange for the information she had. She just said, you know, I saw the article, I thought I should respond. I know that man. I met him when I was 13 years old. And that's the last we knew of my brother. That's the last we know.
Holy cow.
So if you're hooked up to a cable, just adjust it on your phone.
There's good evidence that that's the evidence. I believe the evidence is strong. However, the United States government doesn't want to admit that anybody was left behind. In 1973, right after the 591 prisoners came home, Nixon's administration came out publicly and said, they're all home. In other words, anybody who didn't come home with the 591 is no longer alive. And so they basically abandoned hundreds of men that we knew had been captured but were not returned. So they're not interested in live sighting reports like was found about my brother. DPAA is the outfit you'd want to go to if you knew where you could find remains in Vietnam. If you knew there was a crash site or a grave site, you would go to DPAA. You'd tell them your story. They would go find them, bring them back, have them identified. They'd have the television cameras showing his casket being pulled out of the C-130, and everybody's saluting, and it's very solemn. But if you have a live sighting report, and I gave them a live sighting report. I actually gave them a live sighting report for 2 other men. They're not interested. They do not want to investigate live sighting reports. I could go into the crash site investigation and what happened there and how the live sighting report came about, but that's another story. I can only tell you that our government doesn't want to admit that anybody was left behind, and they refuse to. They have since the Nixon administration, they refuse to acknowledge that these men were ever left behind. And there was hundreds. Right now the list is something like 1,570 something that they work on, but those are people who are just lost in Vietnam. They don't even treat the ones that were lost in Laos, which is greater. It's even greater than that. So they will tell you the official number is 1,570 something, but they don't count the Laotian losses. It's really pathetic. And the families of the missing, their biggest obstacle is DPAA, the government agency that's supposed to be looking for these guys and accounting for them. It's pathetic. It's actually shameful, Bud. It's shameful.
It is, and I've become very disheartened over this specifically. Your daughter was telling me that you've got your cable plugged in. You need to see if you can plug it in a bit more.
But I'm gonna have. Hope I don't lose you. What's happened is that the connection from the cable is apparently failing. But I can, if you'll pardon me for a second, I'm going to take this down. I'm going to do what I can to get that fixed.
It's fine. I just don't want you to run out of battery mid flight. We won't be too much longer, but I just don't want to lose you.
Well, hang on one second. I think I can get this thing in and get it put in correctly.
Roger that.
I think it's in now, but whether or not it's gonna keep. If I get another warning and I got 10% left, then I'll let you know.
Excellent. And we're moving along here, getting towards the end. But there's still a few more interesting tidbits that, as if all of it. Oh, I had a blowout. There we are. Yeah, there you are. As if all of this wasn't enough. Did not. You mentioned you've still got another encounter to mention, but didn't Mr. Red McDaniels have a weird encounter with maybe some Soviet intelligence agents kind of acting like they were magazine reporters?
Well, I believe the last part of his career, he was a liaison between the Navy and Congress, and he began to see a lot of information that he was passing back and forth, and the information he was seeing began to convince him that we had left people behind. He was told by the Navy when he first came back that everybody, that your bombardier navigator Kelly Patterson is likely dead, and you should go to his family and convince them that there's no hope. Well, he did that, but later on in his career, while he was this liaison, he saw information that indicated that we had left people behind, and he started an outfit called American Defense Institute. It's a nonprofit, and he educates usually young military men about the evils of communism. And he was visited one day by two Russians, and they claimed to be reporters from Pravda. His feeling was that they were KGB. They talked to him, they asked him questions about Kelly and so forth. And I think that's what you're talking about. Going back to when he was in prison, he asked guards about, what happened to Kelly Patterson. And he was told that he's okay. His injury has healed, and he's okay. Now you can't say he kept asking them, and that was the answer he finally got. Now you can't say, well, was he prompting them, and were they telling him that just to get him off their back, or were they telling him the truth? There was another man that was a prisoner, and he was sent into an interrogation room, and he was alone for a few minutes, and he saw on this table 5 questionnaires, and each questionnaire, obviously questions to be asked of a prisoner, each questionnaire had the name of a prisoner on its top. And he was on there, and 3 other folks were on there, and he saw my brother's name on there. My brother has, to my knowledge, never been seen by another prisoner who came home and reported that they had seen him. They may have, but McCain got all of their debriefings classified.
Mhm.
So, I can't find out. I can't find out from a debriefing if anybody ever saw my brother. It's all classified.
John Kerry as well. John Kerry and
Yeah,
John
John
McCain.
Kerry and McCain, when the Senate Select Committee on POWs and MIA came out in 1992, there were 2 factions there. Kerry and McCain led one to debunk this whole idea that anybody survived. Bob Smith, senator from New Hampshire, a hero in my eyes, and several other people were trying to get at the truth, and McCain and Kerry prevented them from doing that. Their report indicates, well, not many people were left behind. If anybody was left behind, it wasn't very many. But in fact, they had dug up evidence that people were still maybe alive and in prison in 1992. And it was just, they shut that, Kerry and McCain, they shut that thing down. I mean, it just wasn't, there was, if some of the folks watching right now, if they want to Google, just put an examination of U.S. policy toward POWs and MIAs. This was a government on our side, government agency. These were I think it was the Republican minority of one of the committees. I can't remember the name of the committee, but they did this. It's really an eye opener that the United States government has debunked for years, ever since World War I, World War II, Korea, the Cold War, and Vietnam, has debunked the idea that anybody was ever left behind. And this will, if they read this report, an examination of U.S. policy toward POWs and MIAs, it will really open their eyes. If they will also Google something called 1205 document, 1205 document, and also GX, like Golf X-ray, GX 2527. If they will Google those things, they will be surprised at what they find. I've also, if I could interject, if it's okay, there's a book that people ought to read.
Mm-hmm.
It's by Amy Yersinski. It's called An American in the Basement. There was a fellow named Michael Scott Spiker who was shot down during the first Gulf War, and he was abandoned by our country. And that book, An American in the Basement, you can get it on Amazon. That will show you how the U.S. government abandoned him. And this is something that's probably occurred many times before. If you want to read some really good articles, there was a fellow named Sidney Schanberg. Sidney Schanberg, he was the fellow that wrote that book about the Cambodian that saved his life. And it was called, they made a movie out of it eventually called The Killing Fields. Sidney Schanberger was one of those people, and he was talking about his cameraman, his assistant from Cambodia. And there is a website called beyondthekillingfields.com. Beyondthekillingfields.com. And if you scroll down, you'll find a paragraph called Other Works. And there's a paragraph where Vietnam POWs is highlighted. At the end of that paragraph, it says, click here, click there, and you'll see all of these amazing articles that were written by Sidney Schanberg. One also including John McCain and the POW cover-up. But there's numerous articles showing how the government has lied to us about these men that are missing, and just another, hopefully to just put us all off until I guess we all die off, you know, and the issue goes away. It's just, if you don't mind, is it okay if I put a couple of...
Absolutely. The show's yours, sir.
If you go to usna63.org, that is my brother's story. What you do, usna63.org. When you get to the main page, you hit a link called Last Call. You scroll down to May 19th, 1967, and then you click on my brother's name. And a lot of those pictures that you have, that you showed online here, you'll find them there. It may have been where you found those. Mm-hmm. And his story from others, you know, that were in his squadron is great. It's a great one. And it's interesting. I called out DPAA. Yeah, love them. I called out DPAA a year ago and told them about all the lies that they had told me, all the deceit, all of the betrayal of trust. And I sent that to their second in command of DPAA. And since then, there's another website about my brother that has been hacked. It's called prisoner-of-war.com. And that was hacked so bad. And the guy that did that is Bill Newman, a good friend of mine. He didn't know it had been hacked until I let him know. And you go to that, and you would get a sign saying, oh, I'm sorry, bud. Yeah, we're still there, I think.
Yes, sir. We're here.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just dropped this. And so what he's doing is he's redoing the website. However, what he did is, if people go to that site, he has transferred them over to another site called POWinvestigativeproject.com. This is by Mark Sauter. And so part of my brother's story will be there, but you'll see it in many languages that he broadcasts all over the world. So I thought I'd put those in. If somebody is interested in Rolling Thunder, you might check this out, bud. RollingThunderRemembered.com is an amazing site. RollingThunderRemembered.com. Gosh, and your listeners, your viewers would find these really, really informative. I think it would open a lot of eyes, just those that I've given you. If you want to know what happened aboard the Enterprise during the 67 tour, there's a book called Across, A-C-R-O-S-S, The Wing. It's by a fellow named Dan Heller, and you can get that at Amazon too. There's some great reading there if people want to go beyond Kelly Patterson.
Yes, sir. Codename Bright Light. Frank Anton, I believe, has a book out. Alex, if you could let me know the name of it. I've forgotten the name of it, but he's got a great book out that covers some interviews with ex-NVA that's saying that Hanoi had bodies of dead ready to trade back for money or whatever they could get out of the deal. And there was one more just hair-raising story as we're kind of talking towards the end here and covering some of the outer information aspects. If you wouldn't mind, that crazy call you got 1973 Easter Sunday. Do you remember that Easter Sunday call?
I'm plugging you back in. Hang on 1 second.
Okay.
I'm so sorry about this.
It's fine, sir.
The technology in my house is except for my daughter who keeps me. She's my technical expert here. But that in 19 there's a fellow there was a prisoner. There was a prisoner named Bobby Joe Kesey. He was a civilian. Maybe he was working for the CIA. Some people think he was, but there's no proof of that. There's no evidence that he was. But he hijacked a plane in Thailand, and he made the pilot fly into Vietnam, North Vietnam, and land on the beach. And he was captured. And he was in one of the prisons with some of the prisoners that were being released in 1973. And one of the prisoners knew that he was there, had code talked through to the wall with him. He knew he was there. So when this legitimate prisoner was being left out, he went over and banged on the wall, banged on the door, and demanded that they release Bobby Joe Kesey. So Bobby Joe Kesey came home with everybody else. He's a civilian. I'm sure he was debriefed, but his debrief is probably classified also. Now, Easter Sunday, just before Easter Sunday in 1973, you know that the men by that time, the 591, had all come home. Bobby Joe Kesey's sister called me on the phone and she said, "Bobby Joe, my brother wants to talk to you." And so I met him over coffee at a restaurant Easter morning in 1973. And Bobby Joe Kesey said that I saw your brother's name carved on, I believe he said a bedpost, a wooden bedpost, carved on the name when I was in a prison in North Vietnam near the Chinese border. I thought you should know. He didn't ask for any favors from me. He just says, "I thought you ought to know this." And after talking to him, I got a hold of the U.S. government and asked them, "What do you think about this information that was given by Bobby Joe Kesey?" And they said, "Don't pay attention to them. You know, he was never in a prison camp near the Chinese border, so don't pay any attention to the man." Well, so I didn't. I kind of wrote him off because in those days, I believed the government told me the truth, and that's passed a long time ago. It's interesting though that Bobby Joe Kesey, if you look him up, you find out he built the government he claimed to be from the CIA or somebody in the government, and he built the government for furniture not only here but in Europe. And he eventually came back to the United States, and quite a long time ago, he went to buy an airplane, and he wanted a demonstration flight from the pilot, who took him up, and Bobby Joe Kesey murdered him in the air. And he dumped his body out of the plane and flew the plane to New Mexico, where he was captured. He was tried for murder. He was convicted. He was sent to prison in Arizona, and he died there about 14 years ago or so. Now you can say, "Oh, see, there we go. The man's a liar. He's a crook. He's a criminal." But you know, even criminals tell the truth every now and then. Mm-hmm. Now, why would Bobby Joe Kesey tell me that he saw my brother's name carved on a bedpost when he didn't want something from me? He didn't get a thing from me. Anyway, that's just another one of those trains of evidence that you can't follow down.
I mean that's if you guys read the books that he's mentioned, that I've mentioned, and that Alex has mentioned, that there's a clear indicator in the website that I posted that they were looking for backseaters of the A-6s, and they had a quote unquote pipeline to Russia to get information out of these men. And that lines up North Vietnamese border with China. Next up, Soviet Union. I mean, that's another clear example that your brother's story, Mr. Kelly's story, did not end that when they dropped the extraction rig and he was supposedly killed by the North Vietnamese.
You know, to this day, I don't know if he's alive or dead, and I don't know where he is. And I continue to search and research and try to find out what happened to my brother. And I ask God daily to reveal what happened to my brother, where he is, and to bring him home. If that's just bring my brother home, alive or dead, bring him home. By the way, you showed us some books and so forth. There's a fellow named Mark Sauter, Sauter, and you can go to Amazon and look up some of the books. He wrote The Men We Left Behind, Soldiers of Misfortune. He has written a bunch of books. He's one of our heroes, you know, in the network of POW families. He's one of our heroes, and he's written some really good books, and the evidence in them is amazing. So just, I hope some of you folks that are listening or watching will follow up with some of these links and some of these websites and so forth that I have given you. I'd love to see everybody get a little more educated. We left a lot of people.
We've lost your audio for a second. Let's see. Oh Lord. Yep, we've lost your audio. Let's see. There you go. We've got you back now. Yeah.
All right, I got you back. Thanks.
We got you. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir. We've been wanting to have someone on with some foresight and some knowledge, other than me, you know, with my little bit of research I do. Brandon, who sadly wasn't able to join us tonight. Oh, he is actually now. It's a depressing and sad subject to look into, that our government not only lied to the overall public, but to actual family members. But it's getting into it and looking into it and help spreading the message that men could still be alive. But that's beside the point. Getting them home is the biggest point, and getting the family, such as yourself, your family, closure. I'm only hoping that the little bit that I do, you coming on here, as much as I can share it on social media, as much as everybody else can share it on Facebook by liking it and sharing it, that we can get it out, and maybe it spread somewhere, and someone either knew someone that knew your brother, or, you know, maybe it may end up overseas and somebody in Vietnam may see it. You know, this day and age, that's the glorious thing about technology, that it can do some good things. It can do bad things, but there are some good things it can do. And hopefully this can be one of them. Everybody's putting in thank yous and all of that. Is there anything else that you'd like to cover tonight before we shut down? I know we've covered quite a bit this evening. Is there anything that you can think of that we didn't get into or we didn't cover that needs to be covered?
I can't think of anything you really haven't covered, but I have a request. I would ask people to pray for my brother, to pray for all of these men who have been abandoned by their own government, but to pray to bring those men back, to bring the truth out. We need the truth. Many of these men, probably most, maybe all of these men, are no longer alive. I can't say that my brother's chances of being alive today are great at all. I mean, they're very minuscule that he'd be alive. I mean, the Russians, when they got the information out of him, what would they do with him? And they would either make him slave labor, which would kind of probably kill him, or they would execute him when he was no longer useful to them. But there's a chance. a very slight chance that my brother could be alive, and there's a slight chance that other men could be alive too. So I ask people to pray to God Almighty to bring out the truth and to bring these people home if they're still alive.
That we will, and we'll continue to do it, and we'll hopefully do a weekly show or a monthly show, keeping the POW MIA issue on the forefront. I try and do, as I said, on the small little channel I've got to try and talk about it as much as I can, and that's why I'm so glad you were able to join us. And it's I just can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing this story. We've wanted to have someone on that could, as I said, share some knowledgeable history and actually not just give circumstantial secondhand stories, someone that actually knew, and no one better than yourself. So I just want to thank you before we close out that I just can't put into words how much I appreciate you talking to us this evening.
Well, Bud, thank you very much. I mean, I appreciate you so much. You're my hero. And you're my hero, and I love you, man.
Wow, I appreciate that. I don't know about hero, but I appreciate that. And your brother will definitely be a shining light on the channel, and we'll start doing some memorials to keep him and the other MIA men at the forefront of our attention. And Tim wanted me to tell you hello, but also some people were saying, after you hear about some of the other news coming up later on, they'd love to have you back to talk if you'd be open to coming back and talking to us again.
All right, great. Thank you, Bud.
Excellent. I'll be in touch with you, and we'll go ahead and close off, and I'll shut it down for the night. So, guys, thank you all for joining us, and Mr. Luck, thank you again for joining us.
One thing I want to add too is thank Tim Collier. I appreciate Tim putting me onto you, and Tim's a great guy. And I think Tim says hi. I just got a little note here that says, tell him I said hi. So Tim says hi.
Yeah. I'm going to stay in touch with you. And like I said, hopefully we can get you to come back on and talk to us again. Everybody would love to have you back on from the comments. So
that's great. Next time I won't drop the phone. So
it's not a problem, sir. We did fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and shut it down, and hope everyone has a good evening tonight. So we'll see y'all later.
All right. God bless.